Today, I'm going to show you step by step how I paint this landscape scene. I recently returned from a painting retreat in Sicily. I had a fantastic retreat, and you should consider joining me on one of these in the future if you're into painting and traveling. The landscape in Sicily was beautiful, and I snapped this photo on my last day there, and I really liked the great light at this time of day. As I typically do, I've already laid out my drawing for this scene. Now I'm going to dampen the back of the paper and the front of the paper. One thing to mention about composition is when you are laying out your drawing for a landscape scene, you want to try to avoid splitting your painting in half with the horizon line. So I either want the sky to be more prominent in the painting or the ground to be more prominent in my composition. You can see here that I'm dampening down the back of my paper and the front of my paper. This is a technique that I enjoy where I wet down both sides and I let the paper lay flat on the surface. This gives me more time to paint wet into wet. And I like that, especially when there's a sky involved, that I want to take my time and try to really think through how to create this dynamic display of clouds in my painting. The sun is casting warm light on the clouds. I don't want to just leave them the white of the paper, and so I'm toning the clouds with some raw sienna and a little bit of lavender. There's some subtle value changes that happen in the clouds. I'm adding a little bit more of the lavender into this mixture and darkening that up a little bit and using that for the underside of the clouds. As you paint around the cloud, the natural tendency is to kind of chip away, and eventually you might lose your cloud altogether, or it's a lot skinnier and thinner than you were thinking it would be or that you wanted it to be. So start with it big and slowly chip away until you get the edges and the arrangement how you want them to be. You need to try to paint along with the wetness of the paper, and you have to pay attention to what's happening. You can see here I have some blue drifting down into my cloud. I wanted to get some of the light color of my clouds back, so I took some tissue paper and I'm pushing down and lifting on those parts of the clouds that I want to emphasize the light. If some of that blue has drifted into the cloud, or if I want to add a little more highlight and have a little more control, that's what I use a tissue for when I'm painting clouds. Up until this point, we have painted the light part of the clouds. We've painted the blue around the clouds. Now we need a little more strength to paint the dark shadow underneath the clouds. This will give your cloud a feeling of form. Now, take a look at this brush I'm using here. It's an Escoda Perla, but this is a size 16. Normally you might see me use a size 12. This is a much larger version of that brush. Here's why I like this brush for painting skies. It gives me a little bit more control when I want to go in and paint a little bit more, because we all know what happens if I go in here with too much water. I'll get a bloom or a cauliflower. I'll disturb what I've already painted. But going in with a strong amount of pigment, but a brush that doesn't hold too much water, gives me that extra bit of control that is needed when I'm painting in this delicate stage of the painting. Still dropping in some of the underside of the clouds. Now, when you do this, the different parts of your paper are drying at different times. I got a little bit of a hard edge when I was using this bigger brush. Now I'm taking a clean, damp brush and simply just softening that edge, so I can get the strength that I need for the underside of the cloud, but I can still have that control where I need it to be. Now that my sky is in place, I want to think about the ground that's underneath it. So what I'm using here is some Cobalt Turquoise, some raw sienna, and a bit of cadmium yellow. This is a good vibrant mixture of green. The sun is really shining down on this hill, and I want that vibrancy to really show up in this painting. So I really want some warm, saturated greens for the hill underneath the clouds. Look how strong that wash was. This is still the first wash of my painting, but I know that when I paint that large connected shape of the hill behind it, and I paint it around areas of the ground I want to leave behind, I need that to be strong enough. So don't go too light when it comes to the first wash in your painting. I added more yellow down here to warm it up and to show some different variety of greens and yellows within this first wash. So I added more cadmium yellow and raw sienna in this mixture of my green down here. And at the end of my first wash, this is what the paper looks like. After that first wash has dried, this is how things look. I'm pretty happy with how these clouds look. What I want to accomplish in this wash is painting that large connected shape. And I'm looking at my reference photo, I'm seeing that distant hill along with some of the sweeping shadows and a little bit more information down here. That's what I want to paint in the second wash. So I'm going to start in the back, and I'm using some green, and I left an area here. I wanted to show the sun coming through the clouds and spotlighting some areas. So I painted around this area here. I'll come back in a minute and soften some of those edges. And even in this wash where I'm using a lot of green, I still try to add some variation. So I'll warm the green up. I'll use a little more raw sienna. And then if that's looking boring, I'll add in a little bit of burnt sienna, maybe a little bit of cobalt blue to cool it down. Creating a little bit of variety within the wash goes a long ways. So I wanted to just suggest a building down here, give this area a little bit of interest. So I'm coming down here, trying to break that up and leave some information. And so far in this mixture, I'm using primarily neutral tint, Cobalt Turquoise and raw sienna, and occasionally a little bit of raw umber. That's most of what I'm using for all of these greens in this big shape. Now, while this shape is still damp, I'm going to my smaller brush and adding a little bit of variety, a little bit more information. When it comes to painting trees and large shapes of foliage, I try to really suggest it as much as I can. I don't want to look too closely at the details when I'm looking at the reference photo and get consumed with texture. I want to squint at the reference photo, minimize a lot of that texture, and see how can I represent that in the painting, and then add a little bit of texture so the viewer can understand what it is that they're looking at. But I don't want to have that same repetitive texture, same brush marks from the front of the painting all the way to the back. I really want to try to look at that large shape and simplify it. Adding a little bit of darks and details here in the middle ground is going to bring more attention to that area, as well as bring a feeling of finish to the painting. And it's amazing when you get a few little marks that suggest trees and information. It all just kind of comes together in a really nice, clean way when you can suggest what it is that you see in the photo without getting too consumed with the detail of it. I'm using my fingernail here and just scratching in a few little details to kind of break up the shape, add a little bit of variety. And now I'm adding a little bit of texture. So I'm using the silver black velvet brush, loading up my brush and just doing some dry broken marks to add some texture to this part of the painting. Now texture does a nice job of bringing areas forward in the scene. It makes them feel closer to us. The lack of texture, where it's smoother and more simple, that allows that area to recede into the distance. So I don't want to add this same texture all over the painting here. I like to use it in the middle ground and foreground to let those areas feel closer to us. So I added a little bit more texture over here. Then I felt like I needed a little bit more information in these hills. So I'm doing what I did here and just working my way into the back, trying to not add too many details, but I didn't want it to just feel like one flat shape. It needed a little bit more information. And these little bits of details and darks and marks over here do a good job again of bringing that area closer to us, giving us an area of interest with the contrast and the brushwork over here. A few little sweeping dry brush marks and things like that. And we are almost done with this painting. A few little lines and suggested detail in the middle ground. And there's a look at the final painting. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this. I hope that you enjoyed seeing my process. Next week, I'm going to paint this scene from Arizona. I'm going to talk about how I use layering to create a powerful light effect. So if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I come out with a new video every single Monday. And if you're looking for something that could help you right now, take a look at this. Have you ever been really excited about a painting and you get all set up, you find that right reference that you're excited about, and then it's time to go and you feel lost? I have a free resource that I want to give to you today that can help with these problems. My 5 steps to plan a successful watercolor painting. I walk you through the crucial planning phase of your painting that will help you understand what you're going to paint first, second, and third. The planning is really so important, especially in watercolor. This medium is harder to correct. It's so immediate. So having that plan is very important. I send you a PDF that you can download. And the great thing about this is you can have it on your phone, you could print it out, you can download this right now before you start your next painting. All you have to do is follow this link here and download my 5-step guide to planning a successful watercolor painting.